The morning began as it always did, with the sound of the $180 F water hitting the ceramic filter of the coffee dripper. A precise, rhythmic hiss that signaled the start of a perfectly calibrated day. David Sterling stood in his kitchen, his hand resting lightly on the cold, white marble of the island. The stone was veined with gray like frozen lightning, and under his palm, it felt clinical, unforgivingly smooth. He watched the steam rise in a delicate, swirling column, lit by the pale, low-hanging sun of a suburban October. To the outside world, David was a man of absolute transparency. As the chief compliance officer for a firm that managed billions, his life was a testament to the beauty of the rules. He dressed in shades of charcoal and navy, his shirts pressed with a crispness that suggested he had never known a moment of physical or emotional disarray. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his coffee. The heat bloomed in his chest, but it felt distant, as if his body were merely a suit he was wearing. Behind him, the house hummed with the quiet, expensive sounds of a family in motion. He heard the soft, muffled thud of his son Toby's bare feet on the upstairs carpet, the sound of a boy who moved with the effortless confidence of someone who had never failed. He heard the distant, melodic chime of his wife Sarah's phone, a constant staccato of social invitations and high-end design consultations. Everything was in its place. The air smelled of expensive laundry detergent and the faint, floral scent of Sarah's perfume, a scent called Clarite that cost more than a weekend in Paris. Why does it feel like I'm suffocating? David thought, his eyes tracking a single dust mote dancing in a shaft of light. He looked at his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows. The glass was so clean it was invisible, a dangerous illusion of openness. He saw a man with a steady jaw and eyes that had been trained to look for discrepancies in spreadsheets, yet he felt like a stranger to himself. His life was a masterpiece of normalcy, a structure built with such precision that it left no room for the messy, jagged reality of a human soul. He imagined, for a fleeting second, picking up the heavy crystal vase on the sideboard and hurling it through the window. He imagined the sound, the violent, musical shatter of a million shards of glass hitting the manicured lawn. He imagined the look on Sarah's face as the cold air rushed into their sterile vacuum. "David? You're staring again." Sarah's voice drifted in from the hallway. It was a beautiful voice, practiced and calm. She stepped into the kitchen, her silk robe whispering against her legs. She leaned in to kiss his cheek, and for a moment he smelled the peonies on her skin, but beneath it he thought he caught a whiff of something else, something metallic like copper or old coins. He dismissed it. "Just thinking about the audit today," David lied. The lie tasted like ash, but he swallowed it with a smile. "A lot of moving parts." "You always handle the moving parts, darling," she said, her fingers lingering on his tie, straightening it with a terrifyingly precise tug. "That's what makes us the Sterlings. We don't break." He watched her walk away, her movements as fluid as water. He felt a bead of sweat prickle beneath his starch-stiffened collar. The clock on the wall ticked, a heavy mechanical sound that seemed to echo in the hollow space behind his ribs. Every tick was a reminder of the mask he wore, a mask that was becoming heavier with every passing second of this perfect morning. He was a man living in a temple of glass, and as he reached for his briefcase, his hand trembled, just for a heartbeat, before he forced it back into the stillness of a man who has nothing to hide. The transition began at 5:42 p.m., in the liminal space between the office and the home, a sanctuary of shadow that David called the Void. He did not drive straight back to Crestview Terrace. Instead, he steered his silver sedan into the labyrinth of an older, industrial district where the city's bones were exposed. Here the air was thick with the scent of wet asphalt and charred sugar from a nearby refinery. David pulled into a gravel lot behind a row of derelict storage units. The crunch of the stones under his tires sounded like breaking bone in the oppressive silence. He sat in the car for exactly 3 minutes, watching the rain begin to smear the windshield into a blurred, impressionistic painting of gray and black. He felt his pulse, the rhythmic compliance officer pulse, slowly accelerate into something jagged and hungry. He reached into the glove box and pulled out a secondary phone, a device that felt heavy and illicit in his palm. With a practiced motion, David stripped off his charcoal blazer. He loosened his tie, the silk sliding against his neck like a dying snake. He pulled a dark, hooded sweater over his head. In the dim light of the cabin, the director of integrity vanished. His eyes, usually shielded by the dullness of professional decorum, suddenly sharpened, reflecting the cold blue light of the encrypted screen. He entered a sequence of 24 characters. "Welcome, Janitor." David wasn't just moving money, he was an architect of disappearances. For years, he had operated as the cleaner for a network of high-net-worth individuals who existed in the cracks of the law. He didn't just hide assets, he deleted histories. He manipulated the very compliant software he helped design, creating ghost lanes where millions of dollars could travel without leaving a digital footprint. He stepped out of the car. The rain was cold, a needles and pins sensation against his face that made him feel more alive than Sarah's silk-robed kisses ever could. He walked toward a rusted metal door, the sound of his footsteps echoing off the corrugated steel walls. Inside the unit, there was no furniture, only a folding chair, a high-speed satellite uplink, and the smell of ozone. He sat. The screen flickered to life, illuminating the hollows of his cheeks. Tonight's task was delicate, extraction for a client in Macau. He had to bypass 3 layers of biometric authentication at a bank he had personally audited 6 months ago. As his fingers danced across the keys, David felt a terrifying, beautiful sense of power. "I am the glitch in the system," he whispered to himself. His internal monologue was no longer about interest rates or gala themes. It was a cold, mathematical symphony. He thought about the men he worked with at the hedge fund, men who thought they were titans of industry. He felt a profound contempt for them. They played by the rules because they were afraid of the dark. David lived in the dark so he could own the rules. But as the progress bar hit 90%, a cold shiver climbed his spine. He thought of the kitchen marble. He thought of the way the light hit the $180 F coffee. The two worlds were separated by a thin, vibrating membrane. He could feel the pressure of the normal David screaming to get back in, to return to the safety of the glass walls. He finished the transfer. $40 million vanished into a series of shell accounts in the Cayman Islands. He felt the rush, the hit of dopamine that kept him from unraveling. But as he stood up to leave, he caught his reflection in the dark monitor. His face looked different here. Older. More predatory. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of a trembling hand. He had to go back now. He had to put the tie back on. He had to become the man who worried about the lawn and the roast beef. The transition back was a slow, agonizing process of compression, squeezing his vast, dark soul back into the tiny, polished box of a perfectly normal life. He opened the door to the rain, the smell of the city's rot filling his lungs one last time before he returned to the scent of peonies and lies. The paranoia did not arrive with a bang. It arrived as a slow, freezing mist that settled into the corners of the Sterling household. It began on a Thursday, exactly 10 days after the Macau extraction. David was standing in his home office, the oak door locked, a boundary that was becoming a source of quiet friction between him and Sarah. The air in the room felt recycled, stagnant. He was staring at his professional laptop, the official one, when a small red notification blinked in the corner of the screen. A routine internal security sweep at the firm had flagged an anomaly in the very sector David oversaw. It was a ping, a tiny digital heartbeat that shouldn't have been there. He felt a cold drip of sweat slide down his spine, soaking into the fabric of his bespoke shirt. He reached up, his fingers trembling as they loosened his collar, but the silk felt like a garrote. He began to pace the length of the Persian rug, his mind a frantic chessboard. Did I leave a trace? Was the Macanese bridge compromised? He looked at the family portrait on his desk, Sarah's radiant smile, Toby's earnest eyes, and for the first time they looked like strangers, or worse, like witnesses. Suddenly, a soft, insistent scratching sound came from the door. David froze. His breath hitched in his throat, a sharp, metallic tang filling his mouth. He moved toward the door, his footsteps silent on the rug, his hand hovering over the brass handle. He could hear someone breathing on the other side. A slow, rhythmic sound. David? It was Sarah. Her voice was muffled by the heavy wood, sounding distorted, almost alien. The door is locked, David. You never lock the door during the day. He waited a beat, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. I'm on a confidential call, Sarah. SEC regulations. You know the drill. I made tea, she said. There was a pause, a long, agonizing silence where David felt the weight of her suspicion pressing through the door. You've been distracted lately. Even Toby noticed. He says you don't look at him when he talks about practice. I'm just tired, Sarah. The audit is grueling. Is that all it is? Her voice dropped an octave, becoming a whisper that seemed to vibrate in the very wood of the door. Because the house feels different, David. It feels like there's someone else living here. Someone I don't know. He didn't respond. He couldn't. He watched the shadow of her feet move away from the crack at the bottom of the door. He leaned his forehead against the cool wood, closing his eyes. The psychological cost was no longer a metaphor, it was a physical erosion. He felt like he was made of sand and the tide was coming in. 2 days later, the collision nearly became a catastrophe. David was at the kitchen island helping Toby with a calculus problem. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the lawn. Toby's laptop was open, and David reached over to point out a derivative error. In his exhaustion, his thumb slipped on the trackpad, accidentally triggering a hidden partition on his own thumb drive that was plugged into the port. A window flickered open for a fraction of a second. It wasn't a math problem. It was a wire transfer schematic written in Cyrillic, with a black and white surveillance photo of a shipping container in the corner. Toby frowned, his young eyes narrowing. What was that, Dad? That didn't look like work. David's hand moved with the speed of a striking snake, ripping the drive from the slot. The sound of the plastic snapping was like a gunshot in the quiet kitchen. Proprietary software, David snapped, his voice harsh, his face flushing a deep, guilty red. I told you never to look at my drives, Toby. It's a breach of my contract. Do you understand? Toby recoiled as if he'd been slapped. The boy looked at his father, not with the usual admiration, but with a flickering, cold realization. The golden boy saw the crack in the glass. Sorry, Toby whispered, closing his laptop and standing up. He didn't finish the problem. He walked out of the room, leaving David alone in the darkening kitchen. David stood there, the broken thumb drive biting into the palm of his hand. The smell of the evening roast began to waft through the house, rosemary and garlic, but to David it smelled like decay. He realized then that he wasn't just hiding a secret life, he was losing his real one. The boundaries had dissolved. He was no longer the janitor or the director. He was a ghost haunting his own hallway, waiting for the moment when the glass would finally, inevitably shatter. The evening of the Sterling's annual autumn equinox gala arrived with a sky the color of a fresh bruise, deep purples and heavy slate grays. The house was no longer a home, it had been transformed into a stage. The floor-to-ceiling glass walls, usually so transparent, now acted as mirrors, reflecting the shimmering silk dresses and the sharp, black tuxedos of the 100 guests who drifted through the rooms like schools of exotic fish. The air was a thick, cloying mixture of expensive lilies, wood smoke from the outdoor fire pits, and the sharp, acidic bite of vintage champagne. David stood at the center of the foyer, his hand gripped tightly around a crystal flute. His tuxedo felt like a suit of armor that had grown 2 sizes too small. Every time someone laughed, the sound grated against his nerves like sandpaper on raw skin. He felt the weight of the janitor's phone in his inner pocket, a cold, rectangular pressure against his heart. Just 2 more hours, he told himself, his internal monologue a frantic, looping prayer. Smile. Not. Mention the interest rates. Mention the garden. Stay in the light. Sarah was across the room, the focal point of a circle of local luminaries. She wore a dress of shimmering silver scales that made her look like a siren. She was laughing, her head tilted back, but David noticed the way her eyes kept darting toward him, sharp, calculating, and cold. She wasn't looking at her husband, she was watching a suspect. The rupture began with a flicker of the lights. It was subtle at first, a momentary dimming that caused a few guests to gasp and look up at the recessed LED strips. Then the house's integrated media system, which had been playing a soft, ambient jazz loop, suddenly cut to silence. The vacuum of sound was more jarring than a scream. David? Sarah's voice sliced through the hush. She was standing by the central control panel in the kitchen, her face pale in the sudden gloom. The server is rebooting. Did you move the secure router? David felt a surge of pure, icy adrenaline. It's probably just the storm, Sarah. I'll check the basement. But he was too late. The large projection screen in the living room, intended to display a slideshow of Sarah's design portfolio, blinked to life. But it wasn't a picture of a renovated loft. It was a terminal window. Black background. Neon green text. The guests began to murmur, their faces illuminated by the ghostly glow of the screen. David watched, frozen, as the terminal began to scroll. It wasn't just code, it was a ledger. Macau, Cayman, Zurich. The names of the offshore entities he served began to bloom across the wall in 6-foot letters. Is this a joke, David? A neighbor asked, a nervous chuckle rippling through the crowd. Is this some kind of high-concept compliance art? Then the audio kicked in. It wasn't jazz. It was a recording, a voice memo David had saved on his encrypted drive, a conversation with a broker about cleaning the blood from a series of accounts. David's own voice, distorted but unmistakable, echoed through the million-dollar house, talking about the sheep in Crestview who were too stupid to see the wolves at their table. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a vacuum. David looked at Toby, who was standing by the fire pit. The boy wasn't shocked, he was devastated. He looked at his father with an expression of such profound betrayal that David felt his soul wither. "It's not what it looks like," David whispered, but the words felt pathetic, like trying to stop a flood with a handful of sand. "No, David," Sarah said. She stepped forward, her silver dress catching the flickering light of the screen. She didn't look sad. She looked triumphant. "It's exactly what it looks like. Only you were so busy being the janitor that you didn't notice who was paying the bills." She turned to the guests, her voice projecting with the practiced ease of a master architect. "My husband has been very busy. But he was clumsy. He thought he was the only one with a shadow. He didn't realize that I've been tracking his extractions for years, using them as the perfect cover for my own firm's extracurricular activities." She held up her own phone. The screen showed a mirror of David's ledger, but with one crucial difference. Her name was at the top of the hierarchy. She hadn't just discovered his secret. She had been his silent, invisible landlord, letting him take all the risk while she reaped the rewards. The front doors didn't burst open. There were no sirens yet. There was only the sound of 100 people holding their breath as the perfectly normal family tore itself apart in the center of a glass room. David looked at his wife and realized that the woman he had loved for 20 years was a stranger who had built a cage out of his own secrets. The glass hadn't just shattered, it had turned into 1,000 tiny knives, and every single one of them was aimed at his heart. The silence that followed the gala was not the peaceful quiet of a sleeping house. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb. The months that followed the rupture felt like a slow-motion descent into a frozen sea. There was no grand trial, no televised scandal. Julian's influence and Sarah's meticulous risk management ensured that the most damning evidence remained buried in the private vaults of people far more powerful than them. But the cost was not measured in years of a prison sentence. It was measured in the slow, agonizing evaporation of everything that made David feel human. Today, David stands in the same kitchen at 6:45 a.m. The light still falls in precise, golden rectangles across the marble. The espresso machine still hisses. But the heat of the water, exactly $180 F, no longer feels like a comfort. Feels like a brand. He looks across the island at Sarah. She is dressed for a board meeting, her hair swept back into a tight, severe bun. She looks younger, energized by the cold reality of their new arrangement. She didn't divorce him. A divorce would be messy. A divorce would imply a flaw in the sterling brand. Instead, she kept him as a decorative object, a ghost in a tuxedo. "The Henderson merger is finalized, David," she says, her voice as sharp and thin as a razor blade. "You'll need to sign the compliance waivers by noon. Make sure the signatures are authentic." She doesn't look at him. She looks through him. He is no longer her partner. He is a captive asset, a man whose unique janitor skills are now used exclusively to pave the way for her own cold ambitions. He is the architect of her shadows, trapped in a house where every wall is a reminder of his own stupidity. He walks to the window. The glass is still invisible, still perfect. Outside, the neighbors still wave as they drive their children to school. They see the Sterlings. They see the North Star. They don't see the rot. David's internal monologue is now a vast, echoing chamber of regret. He thinks of Toby. His son didn't stay to watch the wreckage. Toby left that very night, taking nothing but a backpack and the shattered remnants of his childhood. He hasn't called. He hasn't sent a letter. He is a ghost of a different kind, the kind that leaves a hole in the shape of a person. The psychological weight of the lie has been replaced by the psychological weight of the truth. David realizes now that his secret life wasn't an escape. It was a trapdoor he built himself, and he has fallen through it into a basement with no exit. He is a man who lived for the thrill of the transgression, only to find that the ultimate transgression was against the people he claimed to love. He reaches out and touches the glass. It's cold, so cold it feels like it could burn. He realizes he will spend the rest of his life in this perfectly normal prison, eating dinner with a woman who owns his soul, pretending to be a man who died the night the music stopped. As Sarah picks up her keys and heads for the door, she pauses. "Oh, and David? Don't forget to water the peonies. We have guests coming over tonight. We must look our best." The door clicks shut. The sound is final, like a lid closing on a box. David stands alone in the sunlight, surrounded by transparency and light, yet he has never been more hidden. He realizes that the most terrifying secret of a perfectly normal family isn't what they do in the dark. It's that they can keep living in the light long after the soul has been extinguished. He picks up his coffee. It has gone cold. He drinks it anyway, the bitter, flat taste the only honest thing left in his world.